G'day all, and welcome to Forearmed, episode 5. Once again, I'm your local S2 here with all the intel of Team Yankee and Flames of War. So in today's episode, we're going to cover battle stances. One of the most probably important things you'll have to choose when going into a tournament. This can be very daunting to newer players who haven't used these very often. And it also comes back to list creation, which I've covered in episode 2. I'll cover a bit more about the list creation later on in the episode. But first, let's jump straight in and have a look at the missions and the stances and go from there. So, in both games of Flames of War and Team Yankee, you have the missions pack. So you've got, each one has their own set missions for each style of game. Both these games each have the regular battle plans, and then you've also got the extended battle plans. Where I normally play in the tournaments, we use the extended battle plans, just for the pure fact you have more missions and different variety throughout those missions to play with. In Flames of War and Team Yankee, both packs are the same, but there might be some differences in the missions depending on what they come about, and that comes down to your list as well. So, as you can see, we'll have a look at the extended battle plans. You can see how you've got attack, maneuver, and defend, your 3 stances that you choose from. Now, what I've done for you is I've highlighted the commonalities of missions through each of those stances. And you're probably wondering why I've done that. And this is why. Because it's important to understand those missions that are going to come up, and this comes back to making your list. So you look at those missions and go, okay, what is the most favorable mission for my list? And then that will determine the stance that you pick. So, for example, the Dutch list that I took to the Australian Nationals, I spent a good time thinking what I wanted to do and which stance I wanted to pick. However, I wanted to make sure that I was able to choose all 3 stances. And why is that? Because when you come up against a force that you know is going to be quite spammy, having a lot of units on the table, then you've got to turn around and go, okay, I'm going to have as many as my units on the table, and I want to have the least amount of units in reserve. So that's the reason why I went with this list, especially the fact that I only had 40 points of units in reserve, which ended up only being my 4 Leopard 2s, which is my HQ Leopard 2 and my Platoon of Leopard 2s out of that 100 point list. Now, one of the reasons why choosing a stance is very important is if you decide to play a very heavy front armor 4 or more list. This doesn't seem to be much more prevalent in Flames of War, just pure fact that you can take a lot of units less than front armor 4, and most people tend to like using infantry heavy lists in Flames of War. You don't see very many armored lists that often, and when you do, it is quite awesome to look because they generally are painted quite nicely. For Team Yankee though, it's a bit different because you do like to see a lot of tanks on the field, you do like to see a lot of mechanized units on the field. And this comes back to why choosing a stance is important, because if we have a look at defend, a lot of those missions do have the deep reserves rule. And because of that, you're going to end up losing the majority of your force if your force is front armor 4 and above. And this does hurt players who want to take a more elite force, such as BMP3, Marder 2, M1A1, and so forth. Just those units, that people want to play with a large force, but they don't want to have too many models. They want to concentrate on painting, so they might have a more of elite force. And this comes back to that. So, generally what I like to do pre-tournament is have a look at a player's pack. Now, the reason why it's important to look at your players pack is to understand if there are any restrictions, especially on stances. So in some tournaments I've noticed favoured mostly in the United States, they do prefer to have you must choose at least every stance once. So therefore you're forced to choose to take attack, maneuver or defend. So if you're going to choose that heavy elite force of more than front armor 4, this is where it spells trouble, because then you've got to go, oh, I now have to pick defend, and I run the risk of running into an opponent who's going to choose attack, and therefore I have to choose defend because I've left it too late, or I've left it to the wrong time, or it was my only option to do because I've already run out of other stances to take. And that comes back to building a list and creating your list so you know that. And this is why I've created this little color-coded missions so that you understand which missions are probably more preferable for you. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail of the missions because there is a lot of missions. If you want to, I suggest have a good read of the missions pack that's on the Battlefront website, and this will give you the rundown of all the lists. What I've done is color coded it so you can just go, yep, that's the missions I want to use, that's the missions I want to play, and then you can go straight to them and figure out which one's best for you after you create your list. So back to my Dutch list, I chose it so that I had all 3 stances available if I needed them. Even though the tournament had no restrictions on stances over the 2 days of 5 rounds, it was the pure fact that if I had to choose defend, I could choose defend. And this is really great if I wanted to come up against a really heavy, say, British Milan or FV 432 formation, so the smaller British infantry, or even against, say, airborne infantry for Brits as well. Just for the pure fact that those kind of lists, they really want to defend, they want to dig in, they want to get minefields, they want to get all the other really cool stuff so they can just slow you down and just pick you off my lance. We'll talk about that more when the new NATO book hits, hopefully in a couple of months as well. Just for the pure fact that we're going to maybe see some new toys, especially with the French. As we've already seen, Eric's is out there for Nordic, so that does put a few things into the mix as well, and I will talk about Nordic lists later as well, further on down the track in the channel. So, back to the stances at hand. Picking a stance is very, very important in a tournament. I think if you don't pick the right stance, you can suffer from the get-go, especially if you're looking to get that number 1 spot at the end of the day, or at least place within top 3. It definitely does hurt if you do pick the wrong stance. I have been to a tournament where you have had to pick all 3 stances, and it was just sheer luck that I did come up against some good forces out there, like a IPM1 force which chose maneuver and I chose defend, which meant that I didn't get deep reserves in that rule, which was great, because if I did, I would have been screwed because I was playing a British Warrior up armoured list. So if that was the case, I would have lost all my warriors because I would have deployed the infantry and had to leave the warriors at the rear based off the rules. So that's where choosing your stance is very important, but at the same time, choosing your list is very important as well. This episode will be quite short because I would love to go into more detail of the missions, but I don't think you really want to know how many times there's missions and what I want to do with those missions. I just don't think you want to hear me for that long. So back to the stances. So I always choose attack mostly for my games, just for the pure fact I want everything on the board. It's probably one of the better stances to pick. I know a lot of people out there who go, yep, I'm always picking maneuver or defend because that's what is easier, because I know the missions, I know what I want. And I think some people get into the mindset where they go, it's thematic to my list, I've themed my list, it's all about this. I think sometimes you just gotta detach from that thought process, especially if you're going to want to win a tournament. I'm not saying winning a tournament is, got to be done at all costs. I think that breaks down the point of the game to the point where it starts detracting and becomes very familiar to other games out there where it's all about meta chasing and what's hot. And I don't think Team Yankee or Flames of War really benefit from that, because I think the community as itself, we don't tend to like that kind of environment, and I think that's why a lot of us play this game, is because we don't have to worry about a new book dropping every month, or a new change, or a new FAQ, or something to do with that. So if we look at the little color-coded diagram I've done, again, you can take this with however you want. You can look it up. Be great to have a look at all the missions. It does do a bit of a breakdown. As I said, there's a lot of missions in there, but you've got to remember, like in Attack, you do get, I think 3 out of the 6 missions that have 60% reserves. I think one of those has scattered delayed reserves for the defender. So that again is something to take into account. So you've got to be mindful of the missions you play and what the special rules are against them. So this is basically to help you pick the best stance. I'm not going to tell you what stance is the best one to take. That's up to you. But it all comes down to what list you want to build. And that's why it's important to look at the list that you've got and then pick your stance. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's nice, short, sharp, to the point. I'm not going to prattle on too much about the battle stances because at the end of the day, it's your choice. This is just my insight on what I think about battle stances and how I go about choosing battle stances and what I like to do, especially going forward with battle stances. And I hope it just gives you an insight of what most tournament experienced players do have a look at when choosing a stance. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll have some more content for you in the future. Alright, cheers.